Have you ever just stopped and wondered how an idea suddenly explodes? You know, how a trend goes from being totally niche to suddenly being mainstream, like overnight. Well, that's exactly what Malcolm Gladwell explores in his amazing book, The Tipping Point. He dives deep into the mechanics of these social epidemics, and he argues that it all really comes down to three key principles: the law of the few, the stickiness factor, and the power of context.
So, here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll get a handle on what a tipping point really is. Then, we'll meet the three surprising types of people who are the real catalysts for change. After that, we're going to uncover the secret sauce that makes some ideas so sticky and see how the world around us might just be the biggest factor of all. We'll watch it all come together with some fascinating real-world stories, and then we'll wrap up with the key lessons you can walk away with.
All right, let's jump right in. Section 1. What is a tipping point? Gladwell kicks things off with this really interesting idea. Huge social changes almost never happen slowly and steadily. Nope. He says they kind of build up quietly under the surface, and then, boom, they explode all at once.
And that explosion? That's what he calls the tipping point, that one single magical moment of critical mass. He actually compares it to how a virus spreads. See, an idea can hang around in a small group for a long time, and it might not seem like it's going anywhere. But then, if the conditions are just right, it hits this threshold, and it just spreads like an epidemic. That one moment, that's the tipping point.
So what is it that ignites this social fire? Well, Gladwell's first rule is surprisingly simple. He says it's not about the idea itself, it's about the people. But here's the real twist. It's not most people. He calls this the law of the few, and he argues that a very small group of exceptional individuals are the ones responsible for starting almost all social epidemics. He breaks this special group down into three very distinct roles, three types of people who are absolutely essential for an idea to really tip and take off. They are the connectors, the mavens, and the salesmen. Okay, first up we have the connectors. And you know what? We all know someone like this. They are the social hubs, right? The people who somehow seem to know everyone from every walk of life. Their superpower isn't about coming up with ideas, it's about connecting different worlds and spreading the word far and wide. Next up are the mavens. Now these are your information gurus, the people who are just obsessed with knowledge. They're the ones who read all the reviews, they know all the details, and they genuinely love helping people by sharing what they've learned. So if a connector spreads the word, the maven is the one who gives that word credibility. And finally, you absolutely need the salesmen. These are the persuaders, the ones with all the charisma. For them, it's not just about the facts, it's about belief. Their enthusiasm is so infectious that they're the ones who convince the rest of us to actually take the leap, to adopt the idea that a connector spread and a maven vouched for.
Gladwell really brings this to life with a fantastic example from history, Paul Revere's famous midnight ride. Now, we all think he was successful because he just rode around yelling, "The British are coming!" But Gladwell argues that the real secret was Revere himself. He was a master connector who knew all the key people in every single town. He didn't just shout into the darkness, he knew exactly which doors to knock on to get the message to spread like wildfire.
Okay, but just having the right people isn't quite enough. The idea itself has to have certain qualities, and, just as important, the environment has to be right. And this brings us to the next two big principles, the stickiness factor and the power of context.
So, you've got the right people spreading the message. But what about the message itself? Well, this is where the stickiness factor comes in. It's that special quality that makes an idea unforgettable and totally impossible to ignore. Because really, if a message doesn't stick in our heads, it doesn't matter who says it, it's just going to fade away.
Think about a kid's show like Blue's Clues. The creators actually discovered that by making really small, simple changes, like pausing for just a few extra seconds or repeating a key phrase, they made the show incredibly sticky for kids. These tiny little tweaks to the message had a massive impact on how much children learned and remembered. It's fascinating.
And finally, there's the power of context. Gladwell argues that this is the one we almost always underestimate. The simple truth is that the environment we're in has a huge influence on how we behave. The time and the place where an idea is introduced can be the single biggest factor in whether it succeeds or fails.
The classic example of this is the broken windows theory. Back in the 1990s, New York City had a massive crime problem.
But instead of just focusing on the big, major felonies, they started fixing the small things, like cleaning graffiti off subway cars and cracking down on people who jumped the turnstiles. By changing the context and sending a clear signal that even small disorders wouldn't be tolerated, they saw a staggering drop in violent crime. A small change to the environment triggered a huge change in behavior. And you know, this whole idea of context isn't just about physical places. It also applies to our social environments. Gladwell points to something called the Rule of 150. It's this theory that the human brain can only really handle about 150 stable relationships. Once a company or a community gets bigger than that number, the social context changes and things, well, they start to break down. The size of the group itself is a super powerful form of context.
Okay, so we have our three main ingredients, right? The right people, a sticky message, and the immense power of context. So now, let's see how they all combine to create real-world tipping points, using some of the best case studies from the book.
Gladwell really digs into some powerful case studies. We're going to look at how a nearly forgotten brand of shoes, Hush Puppies, suddenly became a global fashion trend. We'll revisit that amazing story of New York's crime drop, and we'll see how these exact same rules apply not just to products, but also to something as serious as the spread of disease.
So first up, Hush Puppies. By the mid-90s, this brand was pretty much dead. Then, all of a sudden, a small handful of cool kids in Manhattan started wearing them, probably as an ironic fashion statement. But these weren't just any kids. They were the perfect mix of connectors and salesmen. Word started to spread, and within a year, the company went from selling just 30,000 pairs to millions. A tiny group in a very specific context tipped an entire industry.
And as we saw earlier, the New York crime story is just the ultimate example of the power of context. The key insight wasn't to go chase every single criminal. It was to change the environment they were operating in. By fixing those broken windows and cleaning up all the graffiti, the city sent a powerful new signal that tipped behavior on a massive scale.
Now this is crucial. Gladwell makes it very clear that these rules are neutral, meaning they can create negative epidemics too. He looks at the spread of syphilis in Baltimore and shows how it wasn't spreading evenly at all. Instead, it was being driven by a few highly active individuals, the connectors and salesmen of disease, if you will, who were operating within a very specific social context that allowed the disease to tip and spread rapidly. And really, underpinning all of this are a few core human tendencies. This entire model runs on the power of word of mouth. It's fueled by the fact that small, seemingly insignificant changes, both in the message and in the context, can have enormous ripple effects. And it all works because our brains are just wired to be influenced by these very factors. Okay, so what's the big picture here? After exploring the people, the message, and the context, what are the most important lessons we should take away from the tipping point? Let's just boil it all down. Number 1, little changes can have huge consequences. 2, a few key people have a completely disproportionate amount of influence. 3, the way an idea is packaged, its stickiness is absolutely critical. 4, context is often the most powerful and yet the most overlooked factor. And finally, the most powerful lesson of all is this: change isn't random. It can actually be created. If you understand these rules, you basically have a blueprint for starting your own positive epidemic. Ultimately, the tipping point is just a really powerful lens for viewing the world. It shows us that the change we want to see, whether it's in our business, our community, or in society at large, might just be one small push away from tipping. So I guess the real question is, what change are you trying to tip?